When a grief-stricken rancher discovers a 13-year-old girl tied to a post by an angry mob, his choice to intervene will force him to confront not just the town's hatred, but the weight of a mercy that could destroy them both. In 1867 Montana Territory, can two outcasts create a family strong enough to survive a world determined to tear them apart? A gunshot cracked through the frozen Montana morning like breaking glass. Marcus Holloway's eyes snapped open in his narrow bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 years of living alone had taught him to wake fast and listen hard. But this sound came from inside his own house. He rolled off the mattress, bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. His rifle leaned against the wall where he always kept it. Another sound drifted from the kitchen, not footsteps, but something else, something that made his skin crawl. Crying. Marcus crept down the hallway, rifle ready. The October wind of 1867 rattled the windows of his ranch house like skeleton fingers. He'd been having the dream again, the one where Rebecca called his name from the kitchen, her voice warm with laughter. But Rebecca had been dead for 3 winters now. The kitchen door stood half open. Through the gap, he could see a small figure hunched over his table. Not a ghost, not a dream, a child. Marcus lowered his rifle and stepped into the doorway. A young girl sat at his table, her dark skin streaked with tears and dirt. Her dress was torn in 3 places, and her thin arms shook as she tried to eat a piece of his stale bread. She couldn't have been older than 13. "How did you get in here?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from sleep. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes were huge and dark, like a deer caught in lantern light. She dropped the bread and scrambled backward, knocking over his only chair. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, mister. I was just so hungry, and the door was open, and I thought nobody lived here 'cause it's so quiet and dark and—" "Slow down." Marcus set his rifle against the wall and picked up the fallen chair. "What's your name?" The girl pressed herself against the far wall, ready to run. "Mercy, sir." "Well, Mercy, seems like you've had a rough night." Marcus studied her torn dress, the fresh cut on her forehead, the way she favored her left leg. "Someone hurt you?" Mercy's chin lifted with sudden pride. "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can." Marcus moved to his stove and began building a fire. "But right now, how about I make us some real breakfast? That bread's older than dirt." He worked slowly, giving her time to watch him. The girl stayed pressed against the wall, but her eyes followed his every move. When the bacon started sizzling in the pan, her stomach growled so loud it echoed through the kitchen. "When's the last time you ate?" Marcus asked. "Yesterday. Maybe the day before." Mercy's voice was small, hard to keep track. Marcus cracked 3 eggs into the pan. "Where are your folks?" "Dead." The word came out flat and final. "Been on my own since summer." "That's a long time for someone your age." Mercy's eyes flashed. "I told you I can take care of myself. I ain't looking for pity. Good thing I ain't offering any." Marcus flipped the eggs. "Just breakfast." The smell of food filled the kitchen. Marcus watched as Mercy slowly relaxed, her shoulders dropping from around her ears. She was skin and bones under that torn dress. Whatever had happened to her, she'd been running on empty for a long time. "You live here all alone?" Mercy asked. "Yep. Ain't you scared? Being way out here with nobody around?" Marcus thought about that. 3 years ago, the silence had felt like death itself. Now it just felt normal. Sometimes. But being scared of being alone is different than being scared of other people. Mercy nodded like she understood exactly what he meant. Marcus put the food on 2 plates and set one in front of her. Mercy stared at it like she couldn't believe it was real. When she finally took a bite, tears started rolling down her cheeks again. "It's good," she whispered. "It's just eggs and bacon. It's the first hot food I've had in weeks." Marcus ate his own breakfast and tried not to watch her too closely. The girl ate like she was afraid someone might take the plate away. Her manners were good though. She said please and thank you, kept her elbows off the table. Someone had raised her right before the world went wrong. "Where were you headed?" Marcus asked when she finished. "Nowhere special. just away from where I was. And where was that? Mercy's face closed up tight. Doesn't matter now. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself plenty of times. Some stories were too hard to tell, especially to strangers. But looking at this girl's torn dress and hollow cheeks, he could guess at least part of what had happened to her. Well, he said, standing up to clear the dishes. You're welcome to rest here for a while. Get cleaned up. Maybe sleep in a real bed. Mercy's eyes went wide. You'd let me stay? Just like that. Just like that. But you don't even know me. I could be a thief or a liar or… Are you? No, sir. Then I guess we're fine. Mercy stared at him for a long moment. Marcus could see her trying to figure out what the catch was, what he'd want in return. It made his chest ache to see someone so young already knowing that kindness usually came with a price. There's a room upstairs, he said. Used to be a sewing room. It's got a bed and a window that looks out over the fields. You can stay there as long as you need. I don't have any money to pay you. Did I ask for money? Mercy shook her head slowly. Then don't worry about it. Marcus headed for the door. I've got to check on the horses. Why don't you get some rest? We can figure out the details later. The screaming woke Marcus before dawn. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and grabbed his rifle. The sound came again, high and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. But it was coming from upstairs. From Mercy's room. Marcus took the stairs 3 at a time. He found her thrashing in the narrow bed, tangled in blankets and fighting invisible enemies. Her face was twisted with terror, and she was crying in her sleep. No, please, she sobbed. I'll be good, I promise. Don't leave me tied up again. Marcus set down his rifle and approached the bed carefully. He'd seen this before, soldiers coming back from the war. His own brother Jake screaming about battles that were years behind him. Night terrors, Rebecca had called them. Memories that wouldn't stay buried. Mercy, he said softly. Wake up. You're safe now. She swung at him blindly, her small fist catching him on the jaw. Marcus caught her wrists gently but firmly. Mercy, it's Marcus. You're at the ranch. Nobody's going to hurt you. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then reality crashed back in, and she collapsed against the pillow, sobbing. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you. It's all right. Marcus released her wrists and sat on the edge of the bed. Bad dream. The worst kind. The kind that really happened. Marcus wanted to ask what had happened to her, but he could see she was barely holding herself together. Instead, he got up and lit the lamp on the bedside table. Soft yellow light pushed back the darkness. You want to talk about it? He asked. Mercy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Won't change nothing. Maybe not. But sometimes talking helps. She was quiet for a long time. Marcus thought she might go back to sleep, but then she started speaking in a voice so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. I was in Clearwater Falls. That's the town about 10 miles from here. I'd been sleeping in Peterson's barn for a few days, trying to stay out of sight. But I was so hungry, and Morrison's store had all that food just sitting there in the window. Marcus knew Morrison's store. He'd bought supplies there for years. Morrison was a hard man who charged too much and gave too little credit. I only took a loaf of bread and some dried meat, Mercy continued. Just enough to keep me going for a few more days. But Morrison caught me coming out of the store. What did he do? Called me a thief. Said I was going to corrupt the whole town if they didn't make an example of me. Mercy's voice got smaller. They tied me to the whipping post in the middle of the street. Said they were going to leave me there until I learned my lesson. Marcus felt anger building in his chest like a brush fire. How long did they leave you there? All night. People came by to stare at me, to tell me what a bad person I was. Some of them threw things. She touched the cut on her forehead. This morning, Sheriff Dalton was talking about maybe taking me to the territorial prison in Helena. Said I needed to learn respect for other people's property. But you got away. Mrs. Chun from the laundry cut me loose. Mercy's eyes met his. She said it was wrong to tie up a child like an animal. She told me to run as far and as fast as I could. Marcus knew Mrs. Chin too. She was a Chinese woman who'd come to Montana with her husband during the gold rush. The people of Clearwater Falls barely tolerated her, and she'd risked a lot by helping Mercy. So you ran here? I saw the light in your kitchen window. Thought maybe. Mercy's voice trailed off. Maybe what? Maybe someone who lived way out here all alone might understand what it's like to be different, to not fit in anywhere. Marcus looked at this brave, broken girl and felt something shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd been drifting through his days like a ghost, not really living but not quite dead either. Now suddenly he had a reason to care about tomorrow. They'll come looking for you, he said. I know. They'll say I'm harboring a criminal. I know that too. Mercy's chin lifted with that familiar pride. That's why I have to leave. I can't bring trouble to someone who's been kind to me. Who says you have to leave? Mercy stared at him. You'd stand up to the whole town? For me? Marcus thought about that. 3 years ago, he wouldn't have gotten involved. He would have minded his own business and let other people handle their own problems. But 3 years ago, he'd been a different man. A man who still had something to lose. Mercy, he said slowly. I've been dead inside for 3 years, walking around, breathing but not really living. You know what I mean? She nodded. Yesterday, when I cooked breakfast for you, was the first time this house felt like a home since my wife died. I'm not ready to give that up. But they'll make trouble for you. Let them try. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. The first pale light of dawn was creeping over the eastern mountains. I've got something they don't. What's that? Marcus turned back to her, and for the first time in 3 years he smiled. I've got something worth fighting for. The horses were going crazy. Marcus bolted from the breakfast table when he heard Thunder, his black stallion, screaming like something was trying to kill him. Through the kitchen window, he could see dust clouds rising from the corral where 4 horses bucked and reared in pure terror. Stay inside, Marcus told Mercy as he grabbed his hat. But when he reached the barn, he found something that made his blood run cold. 3 of his fence posts had been sawed nearly through during the night. One more good storm, and his entire corral would collapse. Worse yet, someone had scattered broken glass in the water trough. If the horses had drunk from it, Mr. Holloway? Marcus spun around to find a small Chinese woman standing near his gate. Mrs. Chun from the laundry, the same woman who had freed Mercy from the whipping post. She clutched a basket in her weathered hands and kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected trouble. Mrs. Chun, what brings you way out here? I bring warning. Her English was careful but clear. Bad men come to my shop this morning. Ask many questions about girl who run away. Marcus's jaw tightened. What kind of questions? They want know which direction she go. They want know if anyone help her. Mrs. Chun stepped closer and lowered her voice. Sheriff Dalton, he very angry. Say girl steal more than bread. Say she take money from store drawer. That's a lie. I know this. You know this. But Sheriff Dalton, he make big story. Say girl dangerous criminal. Say anyone who help her break the law too. Marcus looked back at his damaged fence and felt puzzle pieces clicking together in his mind. They were here last night. Yes, they watch your house. They try scare you. Mrs. Chun opened her basket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. I bring food for girl. And this. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Marcus opened it and read the carefully written words. Territorial Marshal coming from Helena. 3 days, maybe 4. They bring papers to arrest girl and anyone hiding her. A friend. Who wrote this? Marcus asked. Telegraph operator. He good man, but he cannot help more. Too dangerous for him. Marcus crumpled the paper in his fist. For days. That wasn't much time to figure out their next move. And if the territorial marshal was coming with arrest papers, it meant Sheriff Dalton had convinced someone important that Mercy was more than just a hungry child who stole bread. Mrs. Chun, why are you helping us? You're taking a big risk. The old woman's eyes flashed with something fierce and proud. When I come to this country, people say I not belong. They say I go back where I come from. But this my home now. I work hard. I follow law, I hurt nobody. She paused, watching Thunder pace nervously in the damaged corral. Little girl, she like me. She not belong anywhere, but she good person. Good people must help each other. Marcus felt a wave of respect for this brave woman who had risked everything to warn them. Thank you. You be careful, Mr. Holloway. Sheriff Dalton he not give up easy. He want make example of girl to show his power. After Mrs. Chun left, Marcus walked back to the house with his mind racing. Inside, he found Mercy standing at the kitchen window, her face pale with worry. I heard what she said, Mercy whispered. They're going to arrest you because of me. Let me worry about that. No. Mercy's voice cracked with emotion. I won't let you get in trouble for helping me. I'll leave right now. I'll run so far they'll never find me. Marcus caught her arm as she headed for the door. And go where? Winter's coming. You got no money, no supplies, no warm clothes. You'd be dead before Christmas. Better than you going to prison. Is it? Marcus studied her face, seeing the fear and guilt written there. Mercy, let me ask you something. When Mrs. Chun cut you loose from that post, did you tell her to run away and save herself? That's different. How? Mercy struggled to find an answer. Because she was helping someone who deserved it. And you don't think you deserve help? I'm nobody special. Just a girl with no family and no place to go. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for her to do the same. Let me tell you about my wife, Rebecca. When I first met her, she was taking care of her sick mother and 3 younger brothers. Had no money, no prospects, living in a one-room shack that leaked when it rained. Mercy listened with wide eyes. Everyone in town said I was crazy to marry her. Said she'd be nothing but trouble, that I should find a woman from a good family with money and connections. Marcus smiled at the memory. But Rebecca had something better than money. She had a good heart and a strong spirit. She made me want to be better than I was. What happened to her? Fever took her 3 winters ago. But before she died, she made me promise something. Marcus leaned forward. She made me promise that if I ever had a chance to help someone the way she helped her family, I wouldn't let fear stop me. Mercy's eyes filled with tears. You think she would have liked me? I think she would have loved you, just like I'm starting to. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus hadn't planned to say them, but once they were spoken, he realized they were true. In just 2 days, this brave, stubborn girl had become more important to him than his own safety. But the marshal will find us ready for him. Marcus stood up and began pacing the kitchen. We need a plan, and we need help from people who understand what's really happening here. What do you mean? Marcus thought about Mrs. Chen's words, about good people helping each other. I mean, there are more folks in this territory who believe in doing right than Sheriff Dalton thinks. We just need to find them. He walked to his gun cabinet and pulled out his best rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. But first, we need to make sure they don't catch us off guard again. What are we going to do? Marcus looked at Mercy's determined face and felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. Whatever came next, they would face it together. We're going to fight back. A stranger was watching their house. Marcus spotted him just after sunrise, crouched behind a cluster of rocks about 200 yards from the front porch. The man thought he was hidden, but Marcus had learned to notice everything that didn't belong during his years as a hunter. Mercy, Marcus called softly from the kitchen window. Come here, but stay low. She crawled over and peeked through the glass. Who is that? Someone Sheriff Dalton sent to spy on us. Marcus studied the man's position. He's been there since before dawn, probably taking notes on everything we do. What's he writing down? How many people live here? What weapons we have? Whether we look like we're planning to run. Marcus moved away from the window. Get dressed in your warmest clothes. We're going for a ride. Where? To visit some neighbors. If Dalton wants to play games, we'll show him he's not the only one with friends in this territory. 20 minutes later, they slipped out the back door and made their way to the barn through the morning shadows. Marcus saddled Thunder while Mercy kept watch. The spy was still in position, focused on the front of the house. He wouldn't see them leave unless he was paying very close attention. They rode north through a narrow canyon that hid them from view. Marcus had used this route many times during his hunting trips, and he knew every rock and tree. After an hour of careful traveling, they emerged onto a ridge that offered a clear view of the land below. There, Marcus pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. The Patterson spread. Why are we going there? Because Tom Patterson owes me a favor. And because he's got 5 sons who aren't afraid of Sheriff Dalton. The Patterson ranch was bigger than Marcus's, with a large house, several barns, and corrals full of cattle. As they rode into the yard, a tall man with graying hair stepped onto the porch. 3 younger men emerged from the barn, all carrying rifles. "Marcus Holloway," Tom Patterson called out. "Heard you had some excitement in town the other day." Marcus dismounted and helped Mercy down from the horse. "Word travels fast. Faster when it involves Sheriff Dalton making threats about territorial marshals and arrest warrants." Tom's eyes moved to Mercy, taking in her torn dress and nervous expression. "This the girl who's got everyone so worked up? This is Mercy. She's staying with me." "Staying or hiding?" Marcus met Tom's steady gaze. "Both." Tom was quiet for a moment, studying them. Marcus knew the man was weighing his options, thinking about the risks of getting involved. The Patterson family had their own reputation to protect. "What exactly did she steal?" Tom asked finally. "Bread and dried meat. Maybe 50 cents worth of food. And they tied her to the whipping post for that? All night long." One of Tom's sons, a young man named Jake, stepped forward. "Pa, that ain't right. She's just a kid." "I know what she is," Tom said quietly, but his expression had softened. "The question is, what does Sheriff Dalton really want?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. "I think he wants to show everyone in the territory that he's in charge, that he can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants. And you're standing in his way. I'm protecting a child who doesn't deserve what happened to her." Tom nodded slowly. "What do you need from us?" "Information. Support. Maybe witnesses when the territorial marshal gets here." "You think it'll come to that?" "I think Dalton's not going to give up easy. He's already sent someone to spy on my place." Tom's oldest son, Ben, spoke up. "We could pay this spy a visit. Ask him some pointed questions about his business on our range." "No." Marcus shook his head. "Violence will just give Dalton an excuse to bring in more law enforcement. We need to be smarter than that." "Then what do you suggest?" Marcus looked at Mercy, who had been listening to everything with wide, frightened eyes. "We gather evidence. We find witnesses who can testify about what really happened in town. And we make sure the territorial marshal hears our side of the story before Dalton fills his head with lies." "That's a risky plan," Tom said. "It's the only plan that doesn't end with Mercy in chains or me in a territorial prison." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his sons. "Boys, looks like we've got some work to do." Over the next 2 hours, the Patterson family proved why they had survived and prospered in the harsh Montana territory. They were organized, efficient, and completely fearless when it came to standing up for what they believed was right. Ben rode to the neighboring ranches to spread word about what was happening and to ask for support. Jake went to town to find Mrs. Chun and other potential witnesses. The youngest son, Sam, volunteered to keep watch on Marcus's ranch and report back if the territorial marshal arrived early. Meanwhile, Tom sat down with Marcus and Mercy to plan their strategy. "The key," Tom explained, "is to control the story. Right now, Dalton's telling everyone that you're harboring a dangerous criminal. We need to show them the truth, that you're protecting an orphan child from a corrupt sheriff who abuses his power." "But will anyone believe us?" Mercy asked. "Sheriff Dalton's been in charge for years. People respect him." "Some people respect him," Tom corrected. "Others are afraid of him, and a few folks have been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to his bullying." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "You really think we can win this?" "I think you've got something Dalton doesn't expect," Tom said with a grin. "You've got the truth on your side. And in my experience, the truth has a way of winning out in the end." As they prepared to ride back to Marcus's ranch, Mercy pulled him aside. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what if this doesn't work? What if the marshal doesn't believe us?" Marcus looked down at this brave girl who had already survived more hardship than most adults. "Then we'll figure out something else. But I promise you this, I'm not giving up, and I'm not letting anyone take you away from me. Even if it means losing everything?" Marcus thought about his empty house, his lonely life, the 3 years he'd spent just going through the motions of living. "Mercy, before you came along, I didn't have anything worth losing. Now I do." As they rode home through the gathering dusk, Marcus could see lights beginning to flicker in the distance, not just from his own ranch, but from the Patterson spread and other neighboring farms. Word was spreading and people were choosing sides. Tomorrow would bring the territorial marshal and whatever judgment he carried with him. But tonight, Marcus and Mercy were not alone. The territorial marshal's badge caught the morning sunlight like a warning signal as his horse crested the hill. Marcus watched from his kitchen window as the lawman approached, flanked by Sheriff Dalton and 3 other riders. But something was wrong with this picture. The marshal was riding alone in front, while Dalton and his men followed behind like they weren't quite welcome. "He doesn't look like Dalton's friend," Mercy whispered, peering over Marcus's shoulder. Marcus studied the marshal's face as the group drew closer. The man was older than expected, maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was clean but worn, the kind of clothes that belonged to someone who had seen real trouble and wasn't impressed by small-town politics. "Marshal William Hayes," Marcus read from the badge as the man dismounted. "I've heard that name before. Good things or bad things? Depends on whether you're guilty or innocent." Marshal Hayes approached the porch with measured steps, his hand resting casually on his gun. Behind him, Sheriff Dalton looked nervous, constantly wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool October air. "Mr. Holloway," the marshal called out, "I'm here about the girl. I'd like to speak with both of you." Marcus opened the door but didn't invite them inside. "Marshal, Sheriff, this is official business, Holloway," Dalton snapped. "You're harboring a known criminal and—" "Sheriff." Marshal Hayes's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "I'll handle this conversation." Dalton's mouth snapped shut, but his face flushed red with anger. Marshal Hayes removed his hat and looked directly at Mercy. "Young lady, I understand there's been some trouble in town. I'd like to hear your side of what happened." Mercy glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped forward, her chin raised with that familiar pride. "I stole bread from Morrison's store," she said clearly. "I was hungry, and I didn't have money to pay for it. That part's true." "And what happened after you were caught?" "They tied me to the whipping post in the middle of the street. Left me there all night while people threw things at me and called me names." Marshal Hayes's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "And the money from the store drawer? What about that?" Mercy's eyes went wide. "What money? I never took any money. I only took food." "She's lying," Dalton burst out. "Morrison says $20 went missing from his cash drawer. Money that wasn't there after she—" "Sheriff Dalton." Marshal Hayes turned around slowly, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "I said I would handle this conversation. If you interrupt me again, you can wait with the horses." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Marcus could see that this wasn't going the way Dalton had expected. The marshal wasn't just accepting the sheriff's word as truth. "Mr. Holloway," Marshal Hayes continued, "what's your involvement in this situation?" "I found her tied up in town and cut her loose. Brought her home. Fed her. That's it." "And you believe her story about the money?" Marcus looked at Mercy's honest face, remembering how she had tried to pay him for breakfast with work instead of taking charity. "Yes, sir. I do." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on knowing the difference between a hungry child and a thief." Marshal Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And you're willing to face criminal charges to protect someone you've known for— how long?" "4 days." "4 days." The marshal seemed genuinely surprised. That's not very long to risk your freedom for someone. Marcus felt every eye on him as he chose his next words carefully. Marshall, my wife died 3 years ago. Since then, I've been living but not really alive, if you know what I mean. This girl brought life back into my house. She's family now. Family. Marshall Hayes repeated the word like he was tasting it. That's a strong claim. It's the truth. The marshal was quiet for a long moment, studying both their faces. Then he turned to Sheriff Dalton. Sheriff, I'd like to examine the crime scene and interview the witnesses you mentioned. Of course. Morrison's waiting at his store, and I've got 3 other people who, I'll speak with them individually, without you present. Dalton's face went pale. Marshal, I don't understand. These are solid citizens, upstanding members of the community. I'm sure they are, but I prefer to hear testimony without any influence from local law enforcement. Marcus felt a spark of hope. This marshal wasn't the puppet Dalton had expected. He was actually investigating instead of just following orders. In the meantime, Marshal Hayes continued, I'm placing both Mr. Holloway and the girl under temporary house arrest. They're not to leave this property until I complete my investigation. House arrest. Dalton sputtered. Marshal, they should be in jail cells. They're criminals. They're suspects, Sheriff. And until I have all the facts, they'll remain here under my authority, not yours. Marshal Hayes turned back to Marcus. Mr. Holloway, you have my word that this investigation will be thorough and fair. But you also have my warning. If I find evidence that you've helped this girl commit additional crimes, I'll arrest you both without hesitation. Understood. Good. I'll return tomorrow with my findings. As the group prepared to leave, Marcus noticed something odd. One of the men riding with Dalton, a tall, thin man with nervous eyes, kept glancing back at the house. There was something familiar about him, but Marcus couldn't place where he'd seen him before. After the riders disappeared over the hill, Mercy collapsed into a chair, her face pale with exhaustion. He seems fair, she said hopefully. Maybe, but fair doesn't always mean we'll win. Marcus began pacing the kitchen, his mind racing. Something's bothering me about all this. What do you mean? $20 is a lot of money to leave in a store drawer overnight. Most shopkeepers bank their cash at the end of each day. Mercy's eyes widened. You think someone else took it? I think there's more to this story than we know. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her. And I think Marshal Hayes suspects the same thing. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising a cold, wet night. But inside the house, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with determination. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. Marcus, Mercy said quietly. What happens if the marshal doesn't believe us? Marcus sat down beside her and took her small hand in his weathered one. Then we face whatever comes next together. That's what family does. The sound of breaking glass shattered the midnight silence. Marcus jerked awake, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle beside his bed. Another crash came from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on his kitchen floor. Someone was in his house. Marcus crept to Mercy's room and gently shook her awake. Someone's downstairs, he whispered. Get dressed and stay quiet. Mercy's eyes went wide, but she nodded and began pulling on her clothes. Marcus could hear voices now, at least 2 men, maybe 3, moving through his house like they owned it. Check the pantry, one voice said. If there's evidence here, that's where they'd hide it. What kind of evidence? Another voice asked. The kind that proves the girl's been stealing from other places too. The kind that makes this marshal stop asking so many questions. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. They weren't here to steal anything. They were here to plant evidence that would frame Mercy for crimes she hadn't committed. He motioned for Mercy to follow him to the back window. If they could get outside without being heard, they could circle around and surprise the intruders. But as Marcus reached for the window latch, a floorboard creaked under his foot. The voices downstairs stopped. You hear that? Upstairs. They're awake. Heavy footsteps started climbing the stairs, and Marcus knew they were trapped. He pushed Mercy toward the closet. Hide in there. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you. I won't leave you. This isn't about leaving me. This is about staying alive. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Marcus grabbed his rifle and positioned himself in the doorway, where he could see down the hallway. 3 shadows moved in the darkness, and moonlight glinted off gun barrels. Holloway. The voice belonged to Morrison, the store owner. We know you're up there. Come down peaceful and nobody gets hurt. What do you want, Morrison? Justice. You've been hiding stolen goods, and we're here to collect them. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. What stolen goods? The girl's been here for 4 days. When exactly did she have time to steal anything else? Before she came here, obviously. She's been stealing from honest folk all over the territory. You're lying. Am I? Morrison's voice got closer. Then you won't mind if we search your house. Make sure you're not hiding anything that belongs to other people. Marcus heard something that made his heart stop. The sound of cloth being torn, followed by a small metallic clink. They weren't just searching his house. They were planting evidence while they talked. I know what you're doing, Marcus called out. Marshal Hayes won't be fooled by planted evidence. What Marshal? A third voice said with a nasty laugh. That old fool's going to have an accident on his way back to Helena. Horse threw him into a ravine. Tragic loss for the territory. The casual way the man talked about murdering a federal marshal made Marcus realize how desperate these people had become. They weren't just trying to frame a hungry child anymore. They were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs, and Marcus raised his rifle. That's far enough. You gonna shoot me, Holloway? In your own house? With witnesses to testify that you attacked innocent citizens. Innocent? Marcus kept his rifle trained on the shadow. You just admitted you're planning to murder a federal marshal. Proves you're hearing things. Probably the guilt making you imagine threats that ain't there. More sounds came from downstairs. Drawers being opened, things being moved around. Marcus realized with growing horror that they had planned this perfectly. By the time they were finished, his house would be full of evidence that Mercy had been stealing for months. Evidence that would justify not just her arrest, but his own as well. You know what I think? Morrison's voice was getting closer. I think you and that girl have been working together all along. I think you sent her into town to steal for you, and when she got caught, you had to rescue her to protect yourself. It was a clever story, Marcus had to admit. The kind of story that would make sense to people who wanted to believe the worst about a man living alone with a child who wasn't his blood. You're wasting your time, Marcus said. Even if you plant evidence, the marshal will see through it. Will he? Man's getting old, probably not as sharp as he used to be. Besides, won't matter much after his accident. That was when Marcus heard something that changed everything. The sound of horses approaching fast from the direction of town. A lot of horses moving at a gallop through the night. The men downstairs heard it too, because the sounds of searching stopped abruptly. Who is that? Morrison hissed. How should I know? You said the roads would be clear. The horses were getting closer, and Marcus could hear voices calling out in the darkness. Familiar voices. Marcus, you all right in there? It was Tom Patterson, and he wasn't alone. Morrison cursed loudly. We gotta go. Now. What about the evidence? Leave it. We'll come back later. The sound of boots thundered down the stairs and out the back door. Marcus heard horses being mounted in a hurry, then hoofbeats racing away into the night. A few minutes later, Tom Patterson's voice called from the front porch. Marcus, it's Tom. You can come out now. Marcus opened the closet door and helped Mercy out. Her face was pale, but she was unhurt. How did you know to come? Marcus asked as they went downstairs. Ben was keeping watch like we planned. Saw 3 riders heading this way after midnight and figured it meant trouble. In the kitchen, Marcus surveyed the damage. His drawers had been pulled open, his pantry searched, and several items were scattered on the floor that he didn't recognize. Jewelry, coins, and other small valuables that definitely didn't belong to him. They were planting evidence, Marcus explained. trying to make it look like Mercy had been stealing from people all over the territory. Tom picked up a silver locket and examined it in the lamplight. This belongs to Mrs. Harrison in town. She reported it stolen last month. Then Morrison and his friends have been the real thieves all along. Looks that way. Tom's expression was grim. Question is, what do we do about it? Marcus looked at the planted evidence, thinking about Marshall Hayes and the investigation that was supposed to continue tomorrow. An idea began forming in his mind, a risky idea, but one that might expose the truth once and for all. We're going to catch them in their own trap, he said slowly. But we're going to need help. What kind of help? Marcus smiled for the first time in days. The kind that comes with a federal marshal's badge and a very keen interest in the truth. Marshall Hayes was already waiting on the porch when the sun came up. But he wasn't alone. A second man in a federal uniform stood beside him, and both men looked like they hadn't slept all night. Marcus opened the door to find the marshal's keen eyes studying his face with new intensity. Mr. Holloway, we need to talk. This is Deputy Marshal Collins from Helena. We've been investigating some very interesting developments. Marcus invited them inside, where Mercy sat at the kitchen table looking nervous. The planted evidence from the night before was still scattered on the counter, exactly where Marcus had left it. I see you've had visitors, Marshall Hayes observed, examining the silver locket and coins. When did this happen? Around midnight. 3 men broke in and planted these items while they thought we were sleeping. Deputy Collins pulled out a notebook and began writing. Did you recognize any of the intruders? One of them was Morrison, the store owner. I heard his voice clearly. Marshall Hayes picked up the silver locket and turned it over in his hands. This belongs to Mrs. Harrison. She reported it stolen 6 weeks ago. He looked at Marcus with sharp eyes. But here's what's interesting, Mrs. Harrison lives 30 miles from here. She's never even been to Clearwater Falls. Marcus felt puzzle pieces clicking together. So whoever stole this couldn't have been someone just passing through town. Exactly. It had to be someone who travels regularly between communities. Someone with legitimate business reasons to be in multiple towns. The marshal set down the locket. Someone like a store owner who makes supply runs. Morrison, Mercy whispered. Morrison and possibly others, Deputy Collins added. We've been tracking a pattern of thefts across 3 counties. Small items, always from homes or businesses where the owners couldn't immediately identify what was missing. Marshall Hayes moved to the window and looked out toward the road. The thieves were smart about it. They never took enough from one place to cause alarm. A piece of jewelry here, some coins there. By the time people noticed, the trail was cold. But why frame Mercy? Marcus asked. Because she was perfect for their needs, a homeless child with no family to defend her. They could pin all their crimes on her and close the books on months of investigations. The marshal turned back to face them, and his expression was deadly serious. But they made one mistake. They got greedy and tried to silence a federal investigation. Marcus remembered the conversation he'd overheard the night before. They're planning to hurt you. Said something about an accident on your way back to Helena. We know. We've been expecting something like that. Deputy Collins smiled grimly. That's why I'm here, and why we're going to turn their own plan against them. Over the next hour, the 2 marshals explained their strategy. They had been investigating the theft ring for months, following reports from across the territory. When Sheriff Dalton contacted them about Mercy, they had seen an opportunity to get inside the operation. The sheriff thinks I'm here to arrest you both and close the case, Marshall Hayes explained. What he doesn't know is that Deputy Collins has been watching Morrison's store for the past week. We've seen him meeting with known thieves from other towns. So what happens now? Mercy asked. Now we set a trap. Deputy Collins opened his saddlebag and pulled out a small canvas bag. This contains marked silver coins from the territorial treasury. We're going to let word spread that you've been hiding stolen money here at the ranch. Marcus understood immediately. And when they come back to plant more evidence, we'll be waiting for them. But Marshall Hayes held up a warning hand. This plan puts both of you in real danger. These men have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their operation. If something goes wrong, we'll take that risk, Marcus said firmly. Are you sure? You could both disappear tonight, start fresh somewhere else. I could arrange safe passage to California or Oregon. Marcus looked at Mercy, seeing the hope and fear warring in her young face. Running away would be easier, safer. But it would also mean letting Morrison and his partners continue hurting innocent people. What do you think? He asked her. Mercy was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. Mrs. Chun helped me when she didn't have to. Tom Patterson and his family risked their reputation to stand up for us. If we run away now, what happens to the next kid Morrison decides to blame for his crimes? Marcus felt a surge of pride. This girl, who had every reason to be bitter and selfish, was thinking about protecting others. We stay, he told the marshals. Good. Marshal Hayes began laying out the details of their plan. But you need to understand, once this starts, there's no backing out. These men will be fighting for their lives, and they won't hesitate to take yours if they get the chance. As the marshals prepared to leave, Deputy Collins pulled Marcus aside. I've been doing this job for 15 years, he said quietly. I've seen a lot of men in difficult situations. Most of them think about themselves first. And you're different. You're thinking about her first, about what's right first. The deputy glanced at Mercy, who was helping Marshal Hayes gather the planted evidence. That girl's lucky to have found you. Marcus watched Mercy carefully wrapping the silver locket in cloth, treating it with the respect due to someone else's precious possession. I think I'm the lucky one. After the marshals left, Marcus and Mercy spent the rest of the day preparing. They moved the most valuable items to a hidden cache in the barn. They planned escape routes in case the trap went wrong. And they talked about what would happen after assuming they survived. Marcus, Mercy said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. What if this works? What if we catch Morrison and his gang? Then you'll be free. Really free. With no one hunting you or trying to pin crimes on you. But what about us? What about? She gestured at the house, the land, the life they had begun building together. Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Once Mercy was cleared of all charges, she would have choices. She could go to that mission school in Denver or find a family willing to adopt her. She didn't have to stay with a lonely old rancher in the middle of nowhere. That'll be up to you, he said carefully. You'll have options. What if I don't want options? What if I want to stay here? The hope in her voice made Marcus's chest tight. You sure? It's a hard life out here. Cold winters, long days, not much excitement. It's home, Mercy said simply. Your family. Where else would I want to be? As darkness fell over the Montana territory, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Rebecca died. The certainty that tomorrow mattered, that he had something worth protecting beyond his own survival. Tomorrow would bring danger, possibly death. But tonight, sitting on his porch with this brave girl beside him, Marcus Holloway was exactly where he belonged. The attack came just before dawn, when the sky was still dark but the eastern mountains showed the first hint of gray light. Marcus heard them coming, at least 6 horses this time, moving fast and trying to surround the house. But he was ready. They're here, he whispered to Mercy, who was crouched behind the overturned kitchen table they had prepared as cover. Through the window, Marcus could see shadowy figures dismounting and spreading out around the property. These weren't the same 3 men from the night before. Morrison had brought reinforcements, and they all carried guns. Holloway, Morrison's voice echoed across the yard. We know you got our property in there. Send out the girl and the stolen goods, and maybe we'll let you live. Marcus didn't answer. According to the plan, he was supposed to wait for Marshal Hayes' signal before responding. But where were the marshals? They should have been in position by now. A gunshot cracked through the morning air, and with splinters exploded from the door frame inches from Marcus's head. These men weren't here to plant evidence anymore. They were here to eliminate witnesses. Last warning, Holloway. We know you've been working with that girl to rob honest folks. You got 5 seconds to surrender. Marcus caught sight of movement in the barn. A flash of blue that might have been Deputy Collins's uniform. At least one of the marshals was in position. But 6 armed men against 2 lawmen and a rancher didn't seem like good odds. Another gunshot shattered the kitchen window, sending glass flying. Mercy pressed herself lower behind the table, but Marcus could see she wasn't panicking. Her eyes were alert, watching everything, ready to move when necessary. For seconds, Marcus made his decision. Morrison, you're making a big mistake. Marshal Hayes knows everything about your theft ring. Marshal Hayes had an accident last night. Fell into Snake Creek Canyon on his way back to Helena. Terrible tragedy. But even as Morrison spoke, Marcus heard something that made him smile. The distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked, coming from the direction of the barn. I wouldn't count on that if I were you. Marshal Hayes's voice rang out across the yard. Deputy Collins, are you in position? Ready when you are, Marshal. Suddenly the morning erupted in chaos. The thieves, caught between the house and the barn, found themselves in exactly the kind of crossfire they had hoped to avoid. Gunshots echoed across the valley as Morrison's men realized they had walked into a trap. Take cover, Morrison shouted, but his men were already scattering, looking for protection that wasn't there. From his window, Marcus could see the battle unfolding. 2 of the thieves had taken position behind a water trough, but Deputy Collins had a clear shot at them from the barn loft. Marshal Hayes was moving through the shadows near the corral, cutting off their escape route to the horses. But the thieves weren't giving up easily. One of them made a desperate run toward the house, firing wildly as he came. Marcus leaned out and dropped him with a single shot before he could reach the porch. Marcus! Mercy's warning came just in time. Another man was climbing through the back window, his face twisted with desperation and rage. Marcus spun around, but the thief was already inside. His gun pointed directly at Mercy. Drop your rifle or the girl dies. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus could see the fear in Mercy's eyes, could see the thief's finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, all the planning and strategy in the world meant nothing. Only one thing mattered: protecting the girl who had become his daughter. Marcus dropped his rifle and raised his hands. Easy. Don't hurt her. Shut up. The thief was young, maybe 20, with wild eyes that said he was more scared than dangerous. I ain't going to prison for you people. You don't have to hurt anyone, Marcus said calmly. Just walk away. Take a horse and ride out. Nobody has to get hurt. Too late for that. Morrison says you seen our faces, know our names. Can't let you testify. The young man's hands were shaking, and Marcus realized with growing horror that this frightened boy was about to shoot Mercy not out of malice, but out of pure panic. That's when Mercy did something completely unexpected. Instead of cowering or begging, she stood up slowly and looked the thief directly in the eyes. What's your name? She asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? Your name? What is it? Why do you want to know? Because if you're going to shoot me, I want to know who you are. I want to understand why. The young man's gun wavered. It ain't personal. It's just, I can't go to prison. I got a little sister back home. She needs me. How old is she? 10. Our parents died last year. If I go to prison, she'll end up in an orphanage. Marcus saw tears forming in the thief's eyes and realized that this boy wasn't a hardened criminal. He was just another desperate kid trying to survive in a harsh world. I know about orphanages, Mercy said softly. I know about being scared and alone and not knowing where your next meal is coming from. Then you understand why I can't surrender. I understand why you think you can't. But shooting me won't save your sister. It'll just make you a killer. Outside, the gunfire was dying down. Marcus could hear Marshal Hayes calling for the remaining thieves to surrender. But inside the kitchen, the real battle was being fought with words instead of bullets. There's another way, Mercy continued. You could testify against Morrison and the others. Help the marshals understand that you were forced into this. They'll still send me to prison. Maybe. Or maybe they'll understand that you were trying to take care of your family the only way you knew how. The young man's gun dropped a few inches. You really think they'd listen? I think Marshall Hayes is a fair man. I think he'd want to help your sister too. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the thief lowered his weapon. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anybody. Marcus stepped forward carefully and took the gun. Outside, he could hear Marshall Hayes calling for him. It's over, the marshal shouted. Morrison and 3 others are in custody. The rest scattered, but we'll track them down. As they walked outside, Marcus put his arm around Mercy's shoulders. She had just saved all their lives with nothing but courage and compassion. How did you know what to say to him? Marcus asked. Mercy looked back at the young thief, who was now sitting on the porch with his head in his hands. Because I remembered what it felt like to be that desperate. And I remembered that someone showed me mercy when I needed it most. The sun was fully up now, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink. The long night was over, and Marcus Holloway had his family back safe and sound. The courtroom in Helena was packed tighter than a church on Christmas morning. Marcus had never seen so many people crammed into one building, all of them whispering and pointing as he and Mercy walked down the center aisle. The territorial judge, a stern-looking man with wire spectacles, banged his gavel to restore order. This court is now in session for the case of Territory versus Morrison and Associates, Judge Crawford announced. Marshall Hayes, present your evidence. Marcus felt Mercy's small hand slip into his as they took their seats in the front row. 3 weeks had passed since the shootout at the ranch, and now the whole truth was finally going to come out. But the crowd's hostile stares made it clear that not everyone believed they were the victims in this story. Your Honor, Marshall Hayes stood and addressed the court. The evidence will show that Robert Morrison and his associates operated a theft ring across 3 counties, stealing from dozens of families and businesses over the past year. That's a lie, someone shouted from the back of the courtroom. Morrison's an honest businessman. Judge Crawford banged his gavel again. Another outburst like that, and I'll clear this courtroom. Marcus scanned the crowd and recognized many faces from Clearwater Falls. These were Morrison's neighbors, people who had known him for years. To them, the idea that their trusted store owner was a criminal mastermind probably seemed impossible. Marshall Hayes, the judge continued, I understand you have witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. I called Deputy Marshal Collins to the stand. For the next hour, Deputy Collins laid out the evidence in careful detail. He showed maps marking the locations of thefts across the territory. He presented recovered stolen goods that had been found in Morrison's store. He explained how the theft ring had operated, with Morrison using his supply runs to scout targets and coordinate with thieves in other towns. But Marcus could see that the crowd wasn't convinced. They kept looking at Morrison, a respectable-looking man in a clean suit, and then at Mercy, a young black girl in a simple dress. Their faces showed which story they wanted to believe. I call Mrs. Chun to the stand, Marshall Hayes announced. The small Chinese woman walked to the front of the courtroom with quiet dignity, despite the angry murmurs that followed her. Marcus knew how much courage it took for her to testify against powerful white men in front of a hostile crowd. Mrs. Chun, Marshall Hayes began gently, tell the court what you witnessed on the morning in question. I see them tie little girl to post like animal, Mrs. Chun said in her careful English. All night in cold, while people throw rocks and call names. Not right to treat child this way. Did the girl appear to be a dangerous criminal? She hungry child, thin like stick, scared like rabbit. Only take bread because belly empty. Morrison's lawyer, a slick-talking man from Helena, stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This witness wasn't present during the alleged theft. She can only testify to what she saw afterward. Sustained, Judge Crawford ruled. But Mrs. Chun wasn't finished. I see Mr. Morrison after girl run away. He very angry not because of bread. Because girl see something she not supposed to see. What do you mean? Marshall Hayes asked. Night before, I do laundry very late. See Morrison and 2 men loading wagon behind store. They put boxes in wagon, cover with blankets. Very secret, very quiet. The courtroom erupted in whispers. This was new information, something that hadn't come out during the investigation. Morrison's lawyer jumped up. Objection. This is hearsay and speculation. But Judge Crawford leaned forward with interest. What kind of boxes, Mrs. Chun? Small boxes like jewelry boxes, and bags that jingle like coins. Marcus felt his heart racing. If Mrs. Chun was right, Mercy hadn't just accidentally stolen bread. She had witnessed Morrison and his gang dividing up their stolen loot. That's why they had been so desperate to discredit her. She was the only witness to their crime. Mrs. Chun, Marshal Hayes continued, did you recognize the men with Morrison? One was Sheriff Dalton. Other was man I not see before, but he wear badge too. The crowd gasped. Sheriff Dalton, sitting in the back of the courtroom, turned pale as all eyes focused on him. Judge Crawford banged his gavel for order. Marshal Hayes, do you have evidence to support these allegations against Sheriff Dalton? We do, Your Honor. When we arrested Morrison's gang, we found detailed records of their operations. Sheriff Dalton received a percentage of all stolen goods in exchange for looking the other way. That's not true, Dalton shouted, jumping to his feet. I've served this territory faithfully for 10 years. Sit down, Sheriff, Judge Crawford ordered. You'll have your chance to speak when you're on trial. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. The corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Not only had Morrison been stealing from innocent families, but the very man sworn to protect them had been his partner. I call Mercy Washington to the stand, Marshal Hayes announced. Marcus felt Mercy tense beside him. They had practiced her testimony for hours, but standing up in front of all these hostile faces would take enormous courage. You can do this, Marcus whispered. Just tell the truth. Mercy walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She looked small and vulnerable sitting in the big chair, but her voice was clear and strong when she began to speak. I never stole money from anybody, she said firmly. I only took bread because I was hungry and I didn't have any other choice. Tell the court what you saw behind Morrison's store, Marshal Hayes prompted. I was looking for a place to sleep when I heard voices. I hid behind some barrels and watched 3 men loading boxes into a wagon. They were arguing about how to divide up money and jewelry. Did you recognize any of these men? Mr. Morrison and Sheriff Dalton. The third man I didn't know. Morrison's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this girl is a known thief. How can we trust anything she says? But Judge Crawford held up his hand. Let her finish her testimony. Mercy continued her story, describing how she had accidentally knocked over a barrel while trying to sneak away, how Morrison had chased her but lost her in the darkness, how she had hidden until morning, then tried to steal food before leaving town. I knew they would blame me for something, she said. Grown-ups always blame kids like me when things go wrong, but I never thought they would try to say I stole all that other stuff. When Mercy finished her testimony, the courtroom was silent. Even Morrison's supporters seemed uncertain now. The girl's honesty was undeniable, and her story explained everything that had happened. I call Robert Morrison to the stand, the prosecutor announced. Morrison walked to the witness stand like a man heading to his own execution. His confident demeanor had cracked, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October weather. Under questioning, Morrison tried to maintain his innocence. But when Marshal Hayes presented the detailed records found in his store records that listed every theft, every victim, every piece of stolen property, his story fell apart. Mr. Morrison, Marshal Hayes said, holding up a leather-bound ledger. Can you explain why your handwriting appears throughout this record of criminal activities? Morrison's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Morrison just sat there, staring at the evidence of his crimes. No further questions, Your Honor, Marshal Hayes said. As the afternoon wore on, more witnesses testified. Tom Patterson spoke about the night Morrison's gang had tried to plant evidence at Marcus's ranch. The young thief who had surrendered, his name was Billy Carter, testified about being forced to join the gang to support his orphaned sister. By the time court adjourned for the day, the case was clear. Morrison and his associates were guilty of organized theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Sheriff Dalton was guilty of corruption and conspiracy. But as Marcus and Mercy left the courthouse, they could hear angry voices from the crowd. "Don't matter what that judge says," someone muttered, taking the word of a Negro girl over a white businessman. "This whole trial's a sham," another voice agreed. "That girl's got them all fooled." Marcus felt Mercy's hand tighten in his. Even with all the evidence, even with the truth finally exposed, there were still people who refused to believe that a child could be innocent and a respected businessman could be corrupt. The real test would come tomorrow, when Judge Crawford announced his verdict. The verdict came down like a thunderclap that shook the entire territory. Judge Crawford's voice echoed through the packed courtroom as he read the decision that would change everything. "Guilty on all counts. Robert Morrison, you are sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Sheriff Dalton, you are sentenced to 10 years and removal from office." But what happened next was something Marcus would never forget. Instead of accepting the judgment, half the courtroom erupted in fury. Men shouted about injustice, about a corrupt system that sided with criminals over honest citizens. Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the wall near the judge's bench. "This ain't over," Morrison's brother screamed as the convicted men were led away in chains. "You'll pay for this, all of you." Judge Crawford banged his gavel repeatedly, but the angry crowd was beyond controlling. Marcus grabbed Mercy's hand and pushed toward the exit, knowing they needed to get out before the situation turned violent. Outside, the chaos continued. A mob of Morrison's supporters had gathered in the street, their faces twisted with rage and disbelief. They surrounded Marcus and Mercy before they could reach their horses. "There they are," someone shouted. "The liars who destroyed an innocent man." "That girl's nothing but trouble," another voice added. "Should have left her tied to that post where she belonged." Marcus positioned himself protectively in front of Mercy, but they were outnumbered 20-1. The crowd pressed closer, and Marcus could see the ugly hunger for violence in their eyes. That's when something unexpected happened. Tom Patterson and his sons appeared, forming a protective circle around Marcus and Mercy. Then Mrs. Chun stepped forward, followed by the telegraph operator and several other townspeople who had been watching the trial. "Step back," Tom said firmly. "These folks are under our protection." "Protection?" Morrison's brother laughed harshly. "From who?" "A handful of sympathizers and foreigners." But more people kept arriving. Ranch families from across the territory, people who had lost property to Morrison's theft ring, citizens who believed in justice regardless of a person's color. Within minutes, the two groups faced each other across the dusty street like opposing armies. Marshal Hayes appeared with a squad of federal deputies. "That's enough," he shouted. "Anyone who doesn't disperse immediately will be arrested for disturbing the peace." Gradually, reluctantly, Morrison's supporters began to drift away. But their leader, Morrison's brother Jake, pointed directly at Marcus and Mercy. "This ain't finished," he snarled. "You think hiding behind federal marshals will protect you forever? We know where you live." As the crowd finally broke up, Marshal Hayes approached Marcus with a serious expression. "That was an ugly scene. These people aren't going to forget what happened here today. Are you saying we should be worried? I'm saying you should be careful. Morrison had a lot of friends in this territory, and some of them don't care much for legal justice." That evening, back at the ranch, Marcus and Mercy sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. The events of the day had left them both emotionally drained, but also strangely hopeful. "It's really over, isn't it?" Mercy asked. "No more running, no more hiding, no more people trying to blame me for things I didn't do." "It's over," Marcus confirmed. "You're free, Mercy. Completely free." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The trial might be over, but the hatred they had witnessed in Helena suggested that their troubles were far from finished. "Marcus," Mercy said quietly, "what happens now?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading. With her name cleared and her legal troubles behind her, Mercy had choices now. The mission school in Denver had offered her a place. Several families in Helena had expressed interest in adoption. She could have a normal life with people her own age and opportunities he could never provide on an isolated ranch. "That's up to you," he said carefully. "You've got options now. Good options." Mercy was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle high above the valley. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "I've been thinking about those options. About the school in Denver, about living with a family in town, about all the things I could do." She turned to look at him directly. "But you know what I realized?" "What's that?" "I realized that I already have everything I need right here. I have someone who loves me, someone who fought for me when everyone else wanted to give up. I have a home where I belong." She paused, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. "I have a father." The word hung in the air between them like a precious gift. Marcus felt his own eyes filling with tears as the full weight of what she was saying hit him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not an easy life out here. Cold winters, hard work, not much excitement." "I'm sure." Mercy reached over and took his weathered hand in her small one. "This is where I belong. With you. Forever." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, feeling a happiness so profound it made his chest ache. For 3 years after Rebecca's death, he had been merely surviving, going through the motions of living without any real purpose or joy. Now, looking at this brave, wonderful girl who had chosen to be his daughter, he felt truly alive again. "Then it's settled," he said. "We're family, officially and forever." As darkness fell over the Montana territory, Marcus and Mercy Holloway sat together on their porch, planning their future. They would expand the ranch, maybe get some cattle. They would plant a bigger garden in the spring. They would build the kind of life that Rebecca would have been proud of, a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. The weight of mercy, Marcus realized, wasn't a burden at all. It was a gift that transformed both the giver and the receiver, creating bonds stronger than blood and love deeper than any legal document could define. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, but inside the Holloway ranch house, 2 souls had found something worth fighting for: each other, and the radical idea that family is not defined by birth or law or society's approval, but by the choice to stand together when the world tries to tear you apart. And in that choice, they had found not just survival, but redemption, purpose, and a love that would last for all their days.